Hi everyone, Andre Testa. So I'm going over them with you. So AIMS, that's the reason I'm here and presenting on behalf of AIMS. I'm an active member. I've been, really present in the promotion of IPMX, being present in all trade shows like this one, manning the AIMS booth. Reason is there. I'm also a member of the VSF, and I was co-chairing the IPMX codec group. I'm talking about it because I'm going to cover part of the work that we've done there today in my talk. And my day job, as you might say, is I'm the Senior Director of ASIC FPGA and Hardware Engineering at Matrox. So what I'm going to cover today is, well, first of all, it's going to be less technical than the previous presentations. I'm going to cover profiles, but first I'm going to talk about the work that we did at the VSF, part of the IPMX codec group. This is where we kind of develop a method to assess codec quality, but I want to talk about it because it influenced the codec, the profiles that we're defining in AIMS, which is going to be the second portion I'm talking about, and compressed workflows is very important in IPMX. Okay, so from the, what was the scope and objective of our work? So when we started to work in IPMX and it started to gain adoption, we were faced with a lot of compressed workflows and no method to really see how we could pick and choose one to be proper for IPMX. So this is why VSF was mandated with the task to provide guidance or clearly a method to assess the different codecs that are out there to guide an organization like AIMS to come up with the profiles. So how we attacked this, we started by accumulate or identify the most common use cases that are part of the Pro AV landscapes. We defined the metrics that we wanted to use to evaluate the codec against, and provide a test plan, but more an assessment method to evaluate the codecs, and obviously publish our results at the end of this exercise. I always take time to tell people what we were not mandating with, because it's equally important, right? We were not mandating with selecting the winning codec. This was not VSF work. VSF is the technical branch of this whole IPMX effort. AIMS is responsible for identifying the codecs in the profile. So that was not our goal. We're not testing codecs. Testing codecs is a very tedious exercise. We're just providing a method to assess them, and that can be reused by anyone in the industry if they want to do their own assessment. Discussing cost and licensing terms, this was not part of our job. Obviously, we identify if there's open source implementation of those, if there are some RAND licensing associated with them, stuff like that, but obviously no pricing. And, well, obviously not developing any new technology. That was not the goal. Okay, so after assembling, we spent a lot of time, choosing the use cases or identifying the use cases. A lot of time also choosing the metrics. And after that was done, we came up with, we assembled a potential codec list. So this is what you're seeing there, the codec column. There's multiple codecs out there. There's proprietary solutions, open source solutions, and there's many, right? So this list is not to be considered exhaustive. You know, the group just picked most common codecs that or potential that could end up in IPMX. The important things I want to point out is it was divided into three codec categories because codecs have different characteristics. So this has an impact because they behave differently depending on the use case. But the first one, I'm going to tell them because I'm referring to them later, the intra-mezzanine codec. This is a high-performance codec, and the intra term means that every frame are encoded independently. And this is important because when you have corruption, the corruption is rapidly recovered, and there's an ability to do fast switching speed. There's the inter mezzanine codec. So inter means that there's some information that is, carried or spread around multiple frames. So this gives you the ability to get better quality for high frequency content. And the last category is high efficiency. So your codec where you get very low bit rate or high compression rate. On the right, the big table is out of this codec. Now we picked a few to perform our assessment exercise. The contributors were mainly chosen because they were representatives of those organizations in the group. But obviously, it was easy for them to run the tests or the sequences on their codec. And yes, anyway, all the assessment were reviewed within the groups and challenged between the different organizations so that our exercise was coherent. Okay, so the way we decided to do this assessment or represent this assessment is a spreadsheet. So I'm not going to go in details, but those spreadsheets, how they were built, there's a first tab, which is the introduction tab. It was just explaining, how to fill them and the color coding. The second one is the codec information. So in there's a list, it's a brief overview of the codec, gives the pros and cons of that codec, and also the parameters that they must be tested in. Because if you're familiar with codecs, they have tons of parameters. So you can program them in any way you want. So it's very important to define those parameters when you're testing them to clearly reproduce your test. And this is also very important in the profiles that I'm going to talk later about it. And the main tab, which is, the assessment, this is, I just took a snapshot of a portion, just quickly going over them. The light blue columns there represents the use cases that we determined. And out of them, we extracted the common themes, which, let's say, in a certain use case, the themes for a particular codec is it has to be able to encode a 4K P60 stream in a 1 gig network. So some of those, the use cases had common themes that were replicated, so we highlighted them. The green columns rows are the metrics that we decided to use. And for this, we're using broad values instead of a fine grain assessment because we wanted those to be fast to fill and fast to review, obviously. And as we were filling those tables and filling them has taken us a lot of time to generate them, we realized that most of the use cases, the metrics gave the same numbers, so that's why we came up with the yellow column there, which represents the common metrics values that the codecs is giving. There's 3 metrics that I wanted to cover because we spent a lot of time on them. The first one being the quality. We had a lot of debate. How are we qualifying the quality? There's objective methods out there. There's subjective methods. At first, the objective methods is very appealing because it gives you a number. It's easy to compare, but we saw that it doesn't really catch the nuance that you get when you're doing an actual review, and the true performance of codecs in terms of video quality can really only be evaluated during normal playback. Visualizing an actual video instead of the different static frames. So for this, we decided to assemble a list of test sequences that I'm going to show to you very quickly. And very briefly and soon, and that's that. But to do this assessment of quality, we decided to use a 5-point grade scale that is defined by the EVP, the Expert Viewing Protocol. We have an annex that explain all of this, and the idea, again, is to give a quick assessment. The other topic is latency. Obviously, latency is super important, and codec can have a huge impact on latency. And for this, we decided to use a 3-point grade system because there's 3 main, use cases that can be affected by latency, I might say, yeah. So the first one is like subframe latency. So any applications that really require a lot of interactions and quick interactions between the two sides. So we're talking about gaming or medical procedures. The second grade was like a few frames. We settled to 5 frames or less. This is proper for video conferencing, right? The only criteria is that it doesn't affect the normal flow of conversation. And the last point was multiple frames, right? It can go to seconds, and this is proper for applications where there's no interactions between the two sides. We're talking about like video streaming or lecture capturing. And the other point that brought a lot of debate was the switching latency. And well, I say debate, more confusion. People misplaced or misinterpreted switching latency with scene changes. Because whenever you're streaming or you're encoding a single stream and there's a scene change, there's a lot of information that changes and the codec needs to react accordingly, but this is not what we were talking about. The streaming latency is really, you know, you have an encoder streaming stream A, the receiver is getting it, it's decoding it, and then it switches to that stream B, and what's the time required? And when I was talking about intra-frame codec before, where each frame are encoded independently, this switch can arrive instantly, basically, because as you switch, the first frame is all valid. For inter-frame codec, this is not the case, right? You switch to the new frame, there's a bunch of frames that are required to get all the information. You know, the frame that you just missed, add information that is required for this frame. So you need to accumulate a bunch of frames long enough so that you have a full uncorrected frame before displaying it, and this is what we were talking about here. Test sequences, okay, so to do the quality assessment, we assembled a list of test sequences. So we went out there and see what was available in the public domain. Obviously, we didn't want to, you know, gave us more work than required. And, but we identified gaps right away. There was no, you know, standard suites of sequences for computer-generated content, like 444 quality or RGB 8-bit. So these ones, we needed to create them ourselves, and this is the ones identified by VSF. So, and we created those because our idea was to that this set of sequences could become a reference for anyone that want to do codec assessments or anything that covers the whole, you know, Pro AV spectrum there. Usability, okay, so we kept them short, 10-second sequence. 10 seconds is long enough so that you're performing your assessment, but obviously now you have the ability, so not long enough so that you could review all of them within minutes. That was the idea, so that's why we settled for 10 seconds. Long enough so that you do your assessment, short enough so that you can review all of them in a decent amount of time. And copyrights. Needless to say, we needed to have make sure that we could use those sequences for this exercise. So that's why we have the copyrights file attached to them, as these sequences are available, by the way. Okay, so just going over where we took those sequences. So some of them for natural content 422, they're taken from the SVT 2022 test suite, which is a very known test suite. Netflix also, you know, since few years they generated a lot of sequences to encourage innovation and exploration. So we took they have high quality cinematic content there for 2.0. Quality. The AV2 test suite, this is where we picked our gaming and live event sequences. The desktop test suite, the one that we needed to generate. So we just generated desktop activity on a computer and we captured the HDMI output to generate sequences. And the other one is miscellaneous content. This is where we put known sequences like Big Bug Bunny, or a time-lapse video, which interestingly generated a lot of interesting results on the codec. Okay, so So obviously we tabulated all those results, efforts, and we put a report which is built like we have a section describing the use cases, the metrics. We have a section obviously talking about the codecs, describing the list of codecs that we assembled. We have the one explaining the test sequence and their purpose in our effort. The assessment section, which is explaining the whole assessment work there. We have a few annexes. I was talking about the EVP, the expert viewing protocol. There's a whole IUT specification explaining how to review codec sequences, so we just added as a reference. And obviously, we're explaining also in the annex where to, get the documents that we generated, the spreadsheets, the video sequence, and all of that, and how to. We also added, the method how to propose or return your assessment to the VSF for it to be reviewed. So that's that, right? We were mandated to kind of bridge this gap or this lack of a standardized way to assess codec, and I believe we achieved it. So as in terms of a future work, we consider pretty much our work done. So we're open so that if we reach and people would like us to assess a codec or another, but that's all. So this report's there, it's published, it's on the VSF website that François pointed out earlier. And also, it was presented to AIMS for them to use this data to make their decision. And this is why I talked about it. I think it's super important that you see that the decision for the codec within the profiles is inspired by a lot of work, and that's that. Okay, so that brings me to the actual IPMX profile and capabilities section. So this is a table that you might have seen. Sam Racine presented it yesterday if you went to his track. But this is listing the profiles that are currently defined. And what's the goal of the profile, right? It's to clearly define and communicate the device capabilities. If when François was explaining, all the different specs, and I don't know if you realize, but you can design an actual device compliant to IPMX spec, and another vendor could also design a device compliant to all the IPMX spec, but they don't talk, right? The best example is I design an uncompressed video-only device, and the other vendor is designing a compressed-only video device. Obviously, they won't be able to communicate. So this is why we need to come up with the profiles. Is really the reason is to provide guidance in interoperability, right? We need to identify those devices that have certain modes, so that when you're purchasing them or looking for them, it's clear which one are going to work together. So that's the whole idea of a profile. There's so the first column is listing the base profiles as we're saying. The second one is covering also. We're having a method to exploit the extended features. This is common in codecs. As I said, codecs, there's a lot of parameters in there and a lot of features. So sometimes, even though we determine the interoperability point in a certain mode, we want to give the ability to exploit those added features. And there's also a bunch of optional capabilities. There's listed in the spec, but they're not mandated to be called an IPMX device. So I'm going to go into this, how the profiles are built. So there's the first section is the common spec. So the spec that applies to every profiles, basically. So in there, you're going to see the TR10-1, which is explaining the timing. And this is where there's the RTCP sender report defined. I'm not going to go over it. François covered it earlier. The TR10-8, which is listing the NMOS requirement, and the TR10-9, which is giving the information about system environment and device behaviors, basically what you need to support to evolve naturally in an IPMX network. This is going to be covered by Jean in the next track. So all devices are needed to support those specifications. And then we created the different profiles. So the first one is the uncompressed profile. This one is requiring to support TR10-2. But also we added some extra constraint if you want to put an extra, the added complexity on the receiver side. So the transmitter side, for example, they're mandated to support either one of the two pixel format that IPMX dictates, so YUV4 to 210-bit or RGB 8-bit, while the receiver on the other side is required to support both. So the idea is to get, let's say, a universal receiver, so the receiver will be able to stream any transmitter. The next one is the audio profile, which is kind of built in the same way. It's based on TR10-3, and we have the same kind of added restriction. You know, the sender is required to support, well, there's common things, right? The audio is required to support 48 kilohertz sample rate, 24-bit, and then the transmitter is required to support either 1, 2, or 8 channel, as the receiver is required to support all three configuration. Now we have the first compressed profile, which is the JPEG XS profile. Again, you know, built in the same way. There's the TR10-11 requirement. As I was saying, you know, there's a lot of characteristics on the different codec. So we add, you know, it's the same word, but you know, the codecs are also using profiles to determine those sets of parameters. So this one for JPEG XS, the base profile is the high profile. This is what is listed. And also we have those receiver transmitter requirements. And okay, yeah, before going to the next one, this one is really targeting, you know, when I was characterizing the codecs in my first part, you know, I was talking about intra-mezzanine codec. This is what this profile is targeting. So low latency, high performance codec, this is what it's targeting. We have also the HEVC profile, again, built in the same way. But why we focus on HEVC, first of all, its popularity. There's a lot of HEVC devices already out there that can be easily transformed to IPMX, but there's also a big need in Pro AV to have high compression codec, so taking a lot less bitrate. And we're also adding we're working on adding the H.264 profile for the only reason that it's very popular, and there's millions of devices out there, really easy to transform them into IPMX devices. So that was the core profile, you know, the base interoperability point. Now we have the profile features and added capabilities. So for the profile features, this is more targeted towards codecs. So as I said, you know, we determine the base mode. So if I take, for example, HEVC, you know, the modes, the profile in our list, it has to support 420 color space. But now, for people that want to exploit 444 color space, for example, where they need more better quality, better video quality, we want to exploit this. So they connect at we know that they can talk at the 420 level, but we want to build in the protocol a way, you know, so that those devices know that the other one can support 444, so they can negotiate up and make use of these extra features. So that's what we mean by profile features. And there's also the capabilities. So, and by that I mean like HDCP, privacy encryption, forward error correction, USB. They all have their specs, as François was explaining them, but these are all optional features. You know, we don't put the burden of it on the manufacturer to make sure that this device supports HDCP. If he doesn't need HDCP, he doesn't need to build for it. There's added cost and everything. But we need to come up with a way to clearly identify the devices that are supporting HDCP, again, to ensure interoperability and ease of integrating those devices. Okay, so that was the profiles. Everything is defined. But okay, before going to the next step, I can say that if I go back to my slides, you see that we have 5 profiles listed there. And so to get the minimum required to be called IPMX is to comply with the common one and at least one of the profiles. So if I take, for example, I want to be an uncompressed device, so I need to comply with TR10-1, -8, -9, and -2, right? And then I can be an uncompressed HD IPMX device. And these profiles are not exclusive, right? They can be combined together. If you're doing an HEVC audio-video device, then you're gonna have both HEVC and audio profile. Okay, so these profiles are defined, but now how are we making sure that the implementers are compliant with those? So right now we're building a test plan, and Jack in the second track was explaining this effort. We had our first test plan test drive, let's call it, a couple of weeks ago. So we had a first version of the test plan, and we ran those with all the IPMX implementers, and that's how the test plan is built is pretty much the same way as the profile is. So there's the common section, the common tests, and then we're testing, you know, per profile, and the way that the test is built is it's in the view, there's a reference transmitter and a reference receivers, and your device is tested against them. So that went pretty well, but you know, during the exercise we saw that there's some tweaks that could be done. So the plan is to you know, beef up our test plan, add automation, for example. Now everything was manual, so we need to be able to run those tests by even third party. So we want to complete this exercise and have our next testing event for the final test plan, let's call it, at the end of the summer, beginning of the fall. That's the goal. Let's see how it happens. So this is ongoing, and once we're going to have a good test plan in place, we're at the same time we're determining the labeling, right? We talk about the profiles, we know them, but how are we going to advertise that the device is compliant with that profile or not? This is still under discussions. And so that's going to happen at the same time. And the last one is the certification, right? How are we providing those labels? So so this also is under debate. Are we going to do like we did in 2110 and have those regular testing events where you can go and test your device? Are we going to implement you know, self-testing program, or use a third-party lab so that you send your device and they certify it for you? This is still all under discussion, but our goal is to complete all of this part, you know, the test plan, labeling, and the certification for ISC at the beginning of 2026. Oops. All right, so that covers the profiles track. Thank you.